Now, Patrizia Digiovinazzo will be speaking. She's an expert of flora and fauna, as well as a technical facilitator, a role that we have already discussed. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just try to be very quick in presenting some examples of good practices that we implemented for the sake of the conservation of habitats and plant species. Let's start. Let's start with let's start with what was the propedeutic activity for the sake of the conservation of the plant species, drafting an action plan for the plant species that are protected by EU directive 26 species, for which some fact sheets have been drafted in fact sheets that included the conservation status of the plant, as well as the distribution of such plant in Lombardy. Each fact sheet has also some threats and pressures. We usually do this for all the protected species. At the end of the fact sheet, we have also the activities and the priorities in terms of actions that need to be implemented for the sake of the conservation of the plant. Starting from this preparatory action that was implemented, it was carried out 6 years ago, more or less. We drew the indications in terms of priority of conservation. So we have these actions C18, which was the concrete actions for the conservation of protected plant species. Of course, we won't show every single initiative that we have implemented, but I think it's interesting to observe, to see that out of these actions, they stem two different results, two different outcomes, some growing protocols, thanks to the very strong contribution by the CFA, the settlement, as well as the some plants covered by the habitats. Some of these protocols were experimental one. Thanks to these protocols, for example, we planted some masks and some planted covered by the directive, or not covered by the directive, but in any case were protected by region of Lombardy. Let's have a look at two different examples that in our opinion are quite interesting in terms of procedural aspects. The case of plants that have been sued in the Corno della Marogna. We are in the park of the Alto Verde Bresciano. Critical aspects here, the critical issues here was a wildfire that took place in the Corno della Marogna that impoverished some, for example, 40-70 and some arid grasslands at high quote. They were producing some plants, some mosses, some mugworts, and we planted 890 plants. 3 of them were covered by the Habitat Directive. Not all of them were covered by the directive. For example, Daphne petrea and other plants that were in any case protected, even though they weren't covered by the directive. For example, the plant that you can see here in the center, the Sirena Elisabetta, life action that we implemented was a direct plant, because we implanted the seedlings implementing the growing protocol that was drafted as part of the Gestira project. Isoetes malinverniana is another example. This is a very little plant. You can see it is a water fern. This plant was rare in 2009. The University of Pavia monitored some population. It became very rare in 2019. and it almost became extinct in 2022 because the last monitoring conducted by the University of Pavia detected just one population. So we engaged, and the process is complex. We activated here with all the interested stakeholders. With the University of Pavia, which is the only with their botanical garden, they are the only one having isoetes within their botanical garden, as well as the consortium that handled the watering channels, the irrigation channels, the irrigation canals. We are trying to fine-tune these partnerships together with all these partners and the CFA, Centro Flora Autoctona, and we hope to get to 3 different achievements: direct action, planting seedlings, an experimental way of 100 plants of isoetes in one of the irrigation canals that have been monitoring and taken into account by the University of Pavia, and an early action. We took some arrangements together with the Botanical Garden of Città Studi di Milano, so that part of the plants of the Pavia Botanical Garden could be kept also by the Milan Botanical Garden. So we can have 2 different genetical pools. So we can have these plants to be monitoring. And the last one is an indirect action. So that we wanted not just directly plant the seedlings, but we wanted also to manage the conservation, the habitat. So some management guidelines so that the remediation consortia could also take care of an indirect action, so we can see whether if we manage the habitat, maybe the plant can become again natural without our action. As regards some actions to improve the woodland, Marco Toretta already spoke about it. I'll just mention the fact 8 projects have been a reason that's aimed at improving the forest habitats. You can see them with these weird codes, but I guess that you already know. So oaks, forest, chestnuts, and all the others that you already know that. And the C13 action, we try to find some integrated and multidisciplinary methods in trying to step in within the woodlands state-owned, that are state-owned, that are managed by our staff, in order to have a multidisciplinary approach. So we engage not just the forestry personnel, but also some entomologists, some bugs experts. And out of these processes, 9 implementing projects have been arisen within some woodlands that fall within the Natura 2000 site. This is a more complex aspect, because we need also the ecosystem, some conservation, for example, of bats or of Saprosilix entomofauna. This is a more complex approach because this is an integrated approach requiring for more professionalism. This is what we try to implement project. And finally, another relevant guidelines for conservation of oak forests. within the region of Lombardy. So these guidelines can be used not just from the managers, but also the managers that want to preserve these. I'll leave you with some food for thoughts that we derive from the slides that we have just shown you. The first food for thought relates to the direct or indirect actions in this specific case of plants, but we can say this also for animals. I'll plant some seedlings, direct action, or shall I conserve and preserve the habitat so that plants can be born naturally? When is either better? This depends also from the restraints that we have. For example, if there are some constraints in terms of budget, you need to take some choices. Especially also some exotic, for example, if you want to plant a seed, but if the habitat that we decided to plant it, there is an invasion of exotic plants, exotic species, restoration actions become really difficult to be implemented. As regards woodland, as regards woods, we try to implement some multidisciplinary and integrated approach. What's the solution for some approaches that could be both sustainable from an economical point of view as well as functional, effective, yeah, functional. We want them to be effective. Yeah, effective is the right word. We tried to have these different guidelines, which should have our priority. Necromass to the soil, let's prioritize some elements. Should we create some micro habitats? We need to understand what kinds of woods are available to us. We need to work with different figures so that we can have architects also, for example,